This episode of Archispeak is sponsored by ARCAT. So are you ready for a summer trip to NYC, New York City? ARCAT is headed to New York City for the AIA Conference on Architecture this June.
Come visit the Big Red A at booth 707 on June 21st and 22nd at the Javits Center, where every morning ARCAT will be serving coffee for visitors, and throughout the day you'll have their BIM expert Robert Wiegand explaining their new Revit plugin BIMinit.
BIMinit.
Thank you.
BIMinit. Stop by booth 707 anytime and learn how arcat.com can save you time and money finding product information for your projects. Remember, just look for the Big Red A.
BIMinit. 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 Welcome to Archispeak, the podcast that talks about what it's like to work in the profession of architecture.
Welcome to episode 142 of the Archispeak podcast. I'm Neil Pan.
I'm Evan Troxel.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
It's good to be back on the podcast, right, guys?
Welcome back.
I did get a message from one of our listeners who will remain nameless, just saying, I'm so confused.
Actually, I got a text message from a friend as well saying, Evan's left the show?
Yeah, exactly.
Funny enough, it's just like, well, if Evan's, no longer on the show, I can suggest, and threw out a name to me, and I'm like,
yes, who is it? Oh man.
So if if you're looking to replace one of us, please offer up those suggestions.
Send suggestions too. Yeah. No, so I should apologize publicly to my nameless friend because I ignored the text message on purpose, just to make it even more mysterious for quite a while.
That was funny. Good.
Yeah. So I wanted to give a shout out to a listener who wrote in. It's Alexander Bergman, and he wrote a very nice letter, and we just wanted to acknowledge it here on the show because Alex said some very nice things, and we really appreciate it. So I won't go through and read it and
absolutely,
embarrass ourselves or Alex for any reason, just because it was so nice. So thanks, Alex.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it.
It was pretty inspiring.
Yeah,
it was kind of cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Cormac, go for it.
All right, man. So here we are, and we really wanted to talk. We always like to talk about the important things, but this show, it's a really important topic, and that is the royal wedding.
Oh, please.
Yeah.
Come on,
shut up.
It's all the rage right now.
It is.
Everyone's talking about it.
It's going on right now. So as we're recording, we're missing. We should do a live simulcast of
we shouldn't.
The royal wedding and the podcast, and so we could offer commentary.
So much architectural side commentary needs
Neil,
to happen.
think about how enriching we could make that royal wedding if we sat there and commented on the structures around, maybe even the structure of the hat, like the one you're wearing right now.
I'm cutting this all out.
Why? Didn't work. Entertainment value is high.
I couldn't care less about this. So somebody's getting married. BFD.
That's what we thought about you.
Yeah,
it's going to affect your daily life, Neil. So you should definitely take an interest.
Thought we fought a war, so we didn't have to care.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, on that note,
moving on.
No, so this past week was actually pretty eventful outside of the office for me. Got a chance to start the week off in a jury for a BIM course, actually, a non-studio course, but it was kind of interesting. But before I got to the actual jury itself, it was it's end of year. Kids are getting ready to start doing their final senior thesis defenses, or they're going to be doing their senior pinups and things like that. And so it's kind of interesting. I was walking through, and I got there early. I was walking through, and they had already started one jury, and as that jury was going on, kids were, setting up, getting ready for their juries, and it was interesting. I first kind of like just walked past the ongoing jury, so I didn't really want to interrupt them. And as I was walking through, you could see the looks on the faces of the kids who were getting ready, and I remembered that look, and it was that panicked, fearful look of just like, oh my God, this is, the end all be all. And this one girl that I walked up to and didn't know her from anyone. And so I walk up to her and she's just like, you could tell, almost like overwhelmed with emotion. And I walked up to her. I'm like, look, you may feel like this is the most important thing in your life. And probably at this point in time, it might actually well be. But you're going to forget about it in about 30 minutes, and, you're not going to care about it anymore. So just take a really deep breath and just move on.
That kind of applies to just about everything, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
It really does.
I try to remember that all the time now. It's like, oh man, I'm all caught up in this right now, but in a day or two, like this isn't even going to matter. So settle down. I just tell that's my self-talk.
Exactly. And so I started thinking about, and so then I walked back and I was listening to some of the comments about, that the jurists were given, this one kid, and he, this kid was kind of getting a little flustered and, got, knocked kind of off of, off of his train of thoughts. And, I just wonder why we do this to, the young people. And, it's like, well, I went through it, so, I'm going to give hell to the next person.
Because this is the way we've always done it. Yeah.
And it's the rite of passage, and, we're going to have to do this. And I'm thinking to myself, is that really helpful to, the coming generations of architects? I mean, really what we should be doing is not necessarily doing like this one big, death jury. But
death jury? Wow.
Death jury. Yeah, I mean, think about your senior, your last jury in school and what it felt like
those
to
memories.
you.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yes, probably. It's just like, I've been through so much therapy to get that out of my head. No, but I mean, these kids, I mean, sometimes this is probably some of the worst experiences they've ever had. And, it's somewhat off-putting for the profession and otherwise. I mean, I was looking at the quality of the projects. Now, judging it purely on face value of most of these projects, I didn't really know it. But, they did have a little synopsis of what the project was. So, I read a real quick, blurb of some of theirs. And you could look at it and you could see whether or not, based off of their synopsis, if they really got it with all of the visual materials that they were going to do, or was the visual materials just a primer for the conversation that they were going to have, or at least that's what you kind of hope. But I mean, it was just really interesting to just kind of think about, why we do this, why we persist on doing these kind of like, death juries. Let's try to fry them as much as possible. Let's try to throw them off and like criticize them throughout this whole thing instead of really coming back and just figuring out what juries really are.
Well, we've talked about the value of a good critique previously. I mean, maybe we can find a link to that episode, but the value in it truly should be to make the project better. But I will also say that it is valuable to learn how to defend your ideas in a not perfect environment, non-perfect environment. Because if you can do that, you can do it in all kinds of ways in your life. It doesn't just have to pertain to architecture, right?
Right. And I totally agree with that. But, in some cases, like I was sitting there and I was watching this, this one kid, defend his jury, defend his work. And, they were starting to ask some interesting questions about the process of the class and things like that. And he was a little, thrown off by the questions and stuff. And I was thinking to myself, this really isn't a jury about him. This is a jury more about the studio and the professor than it is really about him. And he's having to defend things that he really shouldn't have to be defending. He's defending, the professor and why they were doing the particular projects they were doing and things like that. And so it was interesting, but that was just kind of a side thought to what I was,
right.
The jury itself that I was on, which was kind of interesting because what it was talking about BIM and basically using it as a production and communications tool. It was purely an introductory course, given by one of the associate principals in our office, and she's helping develop the BIM standards and things like that within our office, and so she's practicing what she preaches by teaching it, as well as implementing it in our office. And so it was kind of fun to see how people view the technology in what was great about the class. Real quickly, what was great about the class is this was people who are in interiors, people who are in architecture, people who are in the construction management. And so you're coming from a bunch of different perspectives of what BIM means and how you can use it. So it was kind of interesting because as we went through, and I God bless them, some of these kids just can't give a presentation to save their lives, and it's kind of a shame, because so that's kind of an interesting running theme of some of the things that I want to talk about on the few different things throughout the week that I was involved with. But
presentations are never taught.
Yeah, see, there you go. Are never taught. Yeah, absolutely. But so they're getting up and without getting into the content of the class, right now, my thoughts or critiques is that I think we're failing, and we probably talked about this before, but I think we're failing our students who are coming into the profession, regardless of which path they're taking, whether it's construction management or architecture or whatever. We really are failing them in not teaching them how to public speak and present. And I know that I failed at it.
I was just going to say, isn't part of doing some of these juries and defending your design part of the practice of maybe not explicitly teaching presentation skills, but by the fact that you have to do it, as we all learn to do it more often, we get better at it, maybe?
Well, that's our experience, because now we've been doing it for, a few years, a couple of decades or more in your case, years. Neil.
Shut
up. But I mean, so we've done it, and especially me particularly, if anybody hadn't caught that on listening to the show for the past 5 years, is that I'm not particularly comfortable in public speaking, and so a lot of times I love to avoid it if possible. In conversational situations, I'm perfectly fine, but when it comes to even if I understand or I've got a full grasp of the material, it's that initial kind of start before I really kind of get going into the meat of what I know that I have real issues with and real problems. And one of the interesting things that our office does is, we actually have a public speaker, come in and kind of help with when we're going after major presentations, because, we really want to get it right. And one of the things that people remember the most, sometimes they remember the really good presentations, but most of the times they really remember the really bad ones. And that's, where I think we're failing, because they get up there and they do their jury defenses, or they do these little presentations throughout their career in school. But if they're not really taught how to give a presentation, they're really winging it all the way through, and they're getting better at winging it, but not actually professionally delivering the material. And I think that's where we, really are failing at, giving them the tools or the confidence to be able to properly public speak. And the reason that I kind of bring this up is, so later in later in the week, I got to watch. So I've talked about it a couple of times. So we do. Our office sponsors a high school for the ACE mentoring program, and that's architecture, construction, and engineering. And basically, if nobody knows what it is, I'll give a brief synopsis. It's we pair up with high school students who are interested in the design, construction, and architecture, engineering kind of fields with professionals, and each year they do basically a project, and it goes from about January to May. And at the end, seniors have an opportunity to compete for scholarships. And then, you get the little bragging rights of, you give a presentation and you compete against other ACE teams. And, you get the bragging rights of, hey, we won this year and kind of, we'll come back next year and we'll try to beat you or something, that kind of thing. So it's really kind of fun. And it gives them the opportunity to learn more about the professions that they eventually might want to go into, or maybe even open their eyes up to possibilities that they never even realized that were out there for them. And so, we get together and we try to have, as much of a diverse grouping of professionals as possible so that they can kind of see all of the different aspects of what goes into the design and construction industry. So it's really kind of cool. So they had their final presentations. Our team was competing against 12 other teams in the Baltimore area. And what was interesting is our team was from a prep school. And one of the things that they teach is public speaking. And you could tell because they delivered probably one of the most amazing presentations that any 16, 17, and 18-year-old kids have ever presented that I've seen, and even more so than some professionals that I've seen, or soon-to-be professionals in college, i.e. the juries that I was sitting in on Monday. And so I really, I was just, I'm encouraged. So I didn't really want to, go down this path of public speaking as really the topic. I really more wanted to talk about, kind of this somewhat encouragement from both the BIM classes, the BIM class, and these, future ACE students as future architects and engineers and construction managers, encouraged at their the knowledge that they have at such a young age, or the desire that they have at such a young age to be able to grasp and understand it, that sometimes I see some professionals don't have quite yet, or may have, or don't care about. And it's really encouraging to see that, our future is pretty bright. And I know that we kind of bust on millennials and Gen Ys and all these other, kids coming up, but I'm really actually impressed. And so back to the BIM class, what was most encouraging about that is we know from our day-to-day life that and really since its inception, we've always used BIM, specifically Revit in this particular case, as a production tool, and really just a production tool only. And rarely have we ever used it as a design tool. And what was encouraging is because these kids are coming in blind to Revit, and they really didn't understand what the capabilities were, and they were learning how to use the tools and create, different parametrics, and they were trying to, creating, different things within Revit. They actually even kind of somewhat showed me that Revit really isn't just exclusively a production tool as we use it mostly. It really is a good and efficient design tool if we know how to use it right. And what's interesting about it is because now that they're using Revit 18, and there's, a lot more design-oriented tools within Revit 18, they're learning designing in Revit over things like, SketchUp and stuff like that, which is really kind of encouraging because you're taking this tool that, like I said, we used as a pencil to just get the production out, and they're using it in place of SketchUp or in place of, all of these other ones. And they're going to be able to take it from concept to, schematic design to design development, all in kind of like a one-stop shop. And I know, Neil, you used like ArchiCAD and stuff,
Yeah.
and in ArchiCAD, that's very inherent in ArchiCAD as well. So like all of these different BIM tools are out there. And I know that, a lot of people are like, well, no shit, we've been doing that forever. But have we really?
Some people
15
probably
years.
have.
Well, not forever.
Some people,
Well-
some firms, Cormac, yes, but I think the majority of firms out there haven't.
For good reasons.
Well, yeah, maybe so.
I will add.
But
I don't like the idea of putting all our eggs in one basket and giving all the money to one overlord company like that. I've definitely heard the argument many times about doing everything in one package because of efficiencies and many beans to be counted. But I would also say that it forces you to make a lot of decisions early on when you're not necessarily ready to do that. And as a designer myself, I want to be working in something, whether that's paper or modeling or drafting or whatever it is, or maybe it's a lot of those things all mixed together, but where it's just fluid and fast, and I can iterate, and I can build 10 models in one file. I don't have to start a new file every time. There's lots of pros and cons, I will say, and I like the idea of what you're talking about, but in practice, it's a very difficult thing to do, and there definitely are people who are super good at it. I mean, I know I'm thinking of somebody in particular who's really good at it, where they do everything.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh wait, no, you weren't talking about me.
Well, so there you go.
Well,
I mean, that's my argument against it.
So your workflow is very similar to mine. I mean, we're starting a new project, and we've been sketching out on it, and we've been massing in SketchUp, and then printing them out and sketching over the top of them, and then bringing them in and things like that. All the while, because this is a renovation and infill project, we've been also generating all of the existing conditions in Revit and pulling all of that stuff together. So there's like this, 4, 5, 6 prong attack at, the same, problem and solution, and using them all as overlays. And I love the flexibility of that, and I like that. But, there is something to be said that once you start getting into like the meat of like the building, to be able to start to work towards, taking that concept into reality, something's very appealing to being able to just kind of like flow that right on into it, other than, say you've like really developed a SketchUp model. Well, can you really use the SketchUp model in Revit? Not really.
Oh, I agree with that as well. So because I'm not an advocate for the SketchUp workflow just for that reason right there, because you kind of do have to start over at one point. So
exactly. We lose that.
There are
production.
way smarter tools out there than that. I'll just leave it at that for now.
Well, no, I mean, I'd like to hear it, because it's interesting, because that's kind of where I wanted to go is talking about, one, I was encouraged at the grasp and understanding of and one of the things that I talked to them about, during the BIM crits, and kind of they went up in groups of 3s, and they gave their presentations, and we gave a little mini crit to each of them, after each group of 3, just so it kind of flowed a little bit better. And really the presentations got better and better as we were talking, because then they started, to kind of focus. Even though it was a BIM course, I did keep talking about, having them stay consistent to kind of the subject that they were supposed to be talking about, and the what they learned. And really they were supposed to be giving a presentation about how BIM, is implemented into their process. And a lot of people just talked about the end product, the building and stuff like that. And as we started talking about it more, and talking about the flexibility of BIM within the design process, within like critical thinking, and how you can, do things like do a solar study or whatever, within the, within like just the massings and stuff like that within BIM, that, that can help inform your design process. And then what was good about that is that, the construction managers the people who are on the path for construction management could start to understand why decisions are made by architects, rather than just, they put all of this sunshade devices on their building. Yeah, that's easily value engineered out. And rather than doing that, they're able to, understand, or at least, in these few cases, start to understand why we do what we do, so that, a lot of this isn't just, shit, it looks good, let me just put that on there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I was encouraged about it. But you're right. I mean, we're not there yet. But I mean, one of the things, in fact, you guys are doing it, Evan, in your firm, and I don't know if Neil, you guys are doing it yet, but we're starting to dip our toe into the VR side of things. But I mean, early on, when you guys are developing things in Revit and you want to give them, give your client kind of a tour of that concept design or concept idea, being able to do it in Revit so that you can show them kind of where the concept is leading you, and then being able to take them through VR, I think is, an interesting prospect for the tool in the future. Future is now, but the future.
Well, yeah, and I think, again, VR is not program agnostic to just Revit. It's
sure
there's definitely a lot of people doing that. We're doing that too, but it depends where you are in the process. And I think that one of the hangups with Revit up until now has really been materials, because they do help in VR for sure. And they help in a lot of ways. And I think it's probably more people than it is the tool itself, just not being familiar, because it's not easy to do in Revit. They just have never learned how to do it. It's so much easier in another program, right, where I can just click a face and the material's there. And
Right. And you have to go through the parameters of each material. And
well, you have to all of a sudden set up
a
a bunch of different... Well, if you can do paint by face, right? But that doesn't translate well to other workflows down the pipeline. So
exactly.
So yeah, you have to build these into the families, and then you have to have 20 different wall families because you got different materials already assigned to them, and it just gets to become a management issue of all the different elements that are going on in the model. So there's definitely some hangups. I totally understand why people don't do that and why they prefer to do that kind of stuff in another tool. But along the way, maybe that doesn't matter. Materials don't matter until you get to a certain point. What matters more is volume and space and light and shadow and all those other things. And so it's more about form making earlier on in the process, and that can be in any program. So, the other thing to look at is a VR platform that just takes any model. So that's what we've done is we've invested in Prospect, which is by Iris VR, and it'll take a Rhino model, it'll take a SketchUp model, it'll take a Revit model, or it'll take anything that can spit out an FBX or whatever. And so you just drop the model in and boom, you're in VR. It's amazing. It's super fast. We just actually had a little presentation in our studio this week just to encourage everybody on project teams to get in VR so that they don't have to feel like they need to ask permission. It is something that's available to everybody at any time so that they can understand the models better. And the goal there is kind of twofold. Number one, the project will be better because you understand it better. And you will notice things that you are modeling that don't necessarily translate well in 3D, but they look fine on paper. And I think something that we're really pushing for is looking to a future where there is no longer paper, right? Because that is going to happen one day. And so the better we can build our models now so that they translate into VR and they translate into rendering software without all kinds of problems where somebody has to clean that crap up, because all you really care about is how it looks on paper. We're trying to work toward a future where there is no paper. So fix the models so that they look good. And one way to do that is to get in VR, because people, for whatever reason, get stuck in, the 3D spinning it around on the screen, and Revit up until now really didn't make it easy for you to get in and walk through a model in 3D perspective view. I mean, obviously we can section box and we can axon this thing to death, but actually doing like a walkthrough SketchUp style, I mean, honestly, I mean, this is where SketchUp totally blew everybody away, right? Was with just nice shading, and I can walk through and I can click the little dude icon and click on the place on the floor, and it takes me there, and then I can look around. That's what really changed visualization on the fly in our industry. And so now Revit's definitely trying to catch up to that. And I think they're finally getting there, and obviously computers and graphics cards and stuff are finally allowing us to do that with ginormous models with lots of information in them. But VR is so lightweight and so fast. It's such an immersive experience. It's way different. And all of a sudden you realize that some of these decisions that you're making when you're modeling matter, right? So you get into that space and you experience it and you're like, oh, that's not what I thought. Like one example was we had this little cube where someone was supposed to sit based on a program area, and an inexperienced designer laid this thing out. And then they realized once they got in there in VR that you couldn't even like turn the chair 180 degrees to swing your knees around because you were running into walls. Like it was so tight. And so it doesn't matter what that program area is on paper if it doesn't actually work, right? And so they realized that when they got in there, because they could actually, virtually sit in that chair and plug into that desk and realize, man, this sucks. Like nobody's going to want to sit here. And this is like somebody's workspace. So just as one example, that's where VR really pays off. And we're encouraging everybody to get in there so that we build better models, which has lots of outcomes, not just working towards getting the thing to look good on paper at the end. Like right now, that's probably still what is the priority, what matters most. And if we have to fix something for VR, if we have to fix it for renderings, fine. But we want to work more towards good modeling and injecting that model with tons of information. I mean, that's another beautiful thing about Iris is you can now click on or, point at an object, pull up its BIM information in VR and see everything about that object in there, and you can flag it so that we could talk about it later. There's lots of cool, like actually useful tools during the design process, and it's not just a presentation tool at that point.
Yeah, and that's actually where I'm, me personally, I'm excited about the prospect of VR. I mean, it's great for visualization. It's great for, getting the client excited and things like that. And that's fantastic in its own right. Completely valuable tool. I mean, hell, haven't you guys landed projects using VR? Yeah. So I mean that in its own right is exciting. But as a project management tool, as a constructability tool, or to once you're really into design development and you really want to see if this concept is working, or okay, all right, fine, I have to have a knee wall here. If I'm sitting at my desk, will I be able to see past it? Or what is the views? I mean, it helps test fit all of your design decisions. Yeah,
totally.
In a real world, and I think
because
that's
what you
exciting.
See is what you get. I mean, it is 1-to-1.
Exactly.
It is 1-to-1, and so it's not faking the camera that's way up high in the room, so you get the beautiful angle, and it's not pushing the camera down to the worm's eye view to get that beautiful, crazy perspective shot either. It's straight up, this is how you're going to experience it in real life. And so when you are checking views and you're checking all that kind of stuff, it's real. And so it absolutely is valuable in that regard. It's a big deal.
Well, what's interesting is that, every week now for our School of Nursing physical therapy building in Duke, we have we have BIM coordination calls. And, this is with the contractors. This is with all of the subcontractors and with all of the engineers. And we're going through and we're, doing, real-time clash detection or, test fitting all of the design in there and stuff like that. And because we're doing it essentially, we're doing it over like a go-to meeting, but, essentially this is a VR, exercise where we're doing it all in 3D. We're seeing all of these different layers. We're seeing the design. We're seeing everything sandwiched together. we're seeing where sometimes when the reality, when we don't model things like the insulation around the ductwork, or we don't, model the fireproofing, and, you start to like expand the distance between things. Now you've got a beam. Well, we've been holding things tight to the beam, but we can't hold things tight to the beam because we have 2 inches of, spray fireproofing on that beam. Okay, so now we've lowered it 2 inches. Oh, well, we modeled that with just the 12 by 36 inch duct. Okay, great, but it's not a 12 by 36 inch duct because it has 2 inches of insulation.
Right.
Now we lower it even more. Oh, well, now you need that virtual plane of at least 6 inches for your lay-in light fixtures and things like that. Oh, well, but that encroaches in on that duct insulation. Then you lower that. And you just keep watching it lower and lower, and you're like, well, there goes my 10-foot ceilings.
Yeah, totally.
Well,
let's.
But if we
and then at 50% CDs, someone just says, "Man, we got to lower those ceilings 6 more inches."
Exactly.
Oh,
And
that
you're just
doesn't
like,
ripple
but-
through the entire project and affect everything.
Yeah,
totally.
like we're sitting here and we're watching, and it's just like okay, well, but now we've got the cable tray, and the cable tray is interfering with all of this, and the cable tray can't occupy the same space as this because now it's encroaching in on your fire protection. It goes on and on and on and on. And I was trying to explain this to the BIM class. It's
They
just
don't
like,
want to hear that.
I was like, you're just thinking
depressing.
about it's like you're just thinking about design right now, but when you get into the profession, you have to think about all of that stuff because all of that stuff has an effect, because all you want is that 10-foot ceiling. You think that this 10-foot ceiling it's going to make your building, it's going to make it just feel so open, and you'll get cascading lights and blah 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 blah. But you know what? All of that other shit's going to make it 9-foot ceilings.
We used
or
to be able to
8-foot
say,
ceilings.
figure all that stuff out in the field.
Exactly.
We would get our 10-foot ceiling.
Yeah.
Now it's all got to be modeled, and it's our problem.
Exactly. And so that's why I do like that, the CM is really involving us in this process, because a lot of times, people aren't going to involve us in the process. They're going to make decisions to lower that 10-foot ceiling down to 9 feet to fit all of this stuff in there and not really care about the consequences that it has on the actual architecture.
Right.
And so, to involve us into the process and really just kind of like, I had to draw a line in the sand for a couple of different areas where they wanted to lower the ceilings from, 10 foot down to 9 feet. That's why I'm not pulling that one out of, thin air. I literally have been living it over the past week. And, they're just like, well, we really have to do this because of that. And the good thing is that we're all looking at the same things, and we can all see the routing of the ductwork. And so to be able to suggest, well, if we don't lower the ceiling in here, what else can we do with that ductwork to get the, airflow into that building without having to bring the main trunks, into that room, so that where can we bring the main trunks so that all we have is, the supply trunks rather than the mains. And so, and then keep the ceiling up high, because those ceilings are aligned with my exterior window mullions. Mm-hmm. And then if I lower it, I'm not lowering my exterior window mullions because they're aligned with all of the window heads.
I know all this. Yeah.
And
I feel your pain.
So, but what I'm trying to explain to them is, through my experience, this is what we're going to need to know. And so, understanding and having a grasp of the BIM tools early on, both in, using it as a design, but also communication. I was like, the greatest thing about BIM isn't necessarily about its documentation, which, we use it and, it's great for that. And people who are using it as design, great. And it's, really good for that, could be better, but it's really about the communication. It's how are we communicating our design intent to that contractor who's going to have to build our design intent.
Well, it's established a platform where everybody can open and get into that model.
Exactly.
And that's the communication you're talking about. And I wanted to add with the VR thing, just to kind of finish this off before I forget, is that it's great at establishing consensus and that intent. If you can do those big room type meetings with those people in VR, it makes a enormous difference over 2D on a screen.
Yeah.
Enormous, because then people can actually see what you're after and why you're after it, because you're there to explain it. And what I'll say that one of the neatest kind of inventions with VR in the past year or two, where it's actually now really working, is multi-person VR. So you don't have to be in the same room at the same time, but you can meet in the model. It actually works better if you're not in the same room, because you don't have to ever worry about running into somebody. Because in VR, you can teleport wherever you want. It's not one-to-one walking around a building. And so if you are in the same room together, you could really, because you can't see, you've got the fanny pack on your face, right? You're going to probably run into the other person who has the fanny pack on their face in the same room. So it's actually better if you guys are in different rooms or in different offices, because then you can talk to each other. Every VR headset's got a microphone. You've got headphones. You can see each other like with a representative avatar kind of thing in VR, so that you know kind of where they are in the model spatially. And there's some VR systems that even have spatial awareness with the audio. So if they're on your right, you can hear them in the right ear only. And as if you turn around, you'll hear them in your left ear. So that, again, it just kind of helps with spatial awareness and where people are in the room. But that's not a total necessary thing. That's just kind of a cool thing. But it is nice to meet in the model. We have, I think, 5 different offices set up with this now, and we can meet in the model. And it makes a huge difference to go in there especially when you're working cross office, or if you're working with outside consultants who have a similar setup. And now they've even added in the ability for someone just to be able to tune in from anywhere via just their computer. So they don't even have to have the headset, although it is way better to be immersed in the model together. But you can just kind of view it now, which is kind of cool. So it makes it so that anybody can get in there and see things whenever they want. But it's an amazing tool to use for that kind of thing, because we can actually talk about the way those ducts are running, because we can expose them. Like I can actually hide a ceiling, and we can look at that stuff together in VR in the room and talk about how all that stuff is working. And when you're talking about communication, I mean, that's really what it's all about. And so therefore, I would further argue that the most important thing about BIM is the letter I in the middle, right? Information, because that is what is making everybody's decisions go whichever path they go. And so if you're running that stuff kind of accurately in the model, then the balance becomes, how detailed do we get, right? So the more detail, the better, but also we all know that takes an immense amount of time, kind of exponentially, the further you go down the rabbit hole of level of detail. So something else to think about. And again, thinking about, you had, before we started recording, we're talking about line weights and stuff. It's like, I think at some point that's just going to become irrelevant. It's going to be all about the model and how it's representative.
Yeah, and what I was saying before show is that, as of right now, a lot of people are still building off of the 2D documents, and so clarity of information, it all comes back to that the information, is imperative, and so that's why I was kind of like on my soapbox of line weights and legibility of between line weights and clarity and things like that, but. What was interesting, and here's where, we take that pre-show conversation of, talking about, CAD and being able to manipulate things so it kind of looks right on paper, and meets the BIM world, is that, we have a couple of our consultants on this project are, still in CAD, namely the civil engineer. And, so we've got all of these underground utilities and stuffs coming through. We've got, the on-campus, steam lines that are going through and that we're tapping off of that coming into our building, but how our other new utilities are affecting that, existing steam line and where they're coming in, or where that steam line is crossing over duct banks and things like that. Because he drew everything in 2D, we never really fully saw where the conditions were of the crossovers, whether it's with existing or new utilities, or how is it penetrating into the building? Where are those footing and foundation locations? Can we do that? Is it going to have an effect on the foundation? Do we need to lower the foundation? Things like that. And so as the CM modeled all of that stuff up and modeled it based off of the elevation, the invert elevations, and everything else.
They'll get paid to do that.
Yeah. Well,
sure.
yeah. And so they've modeled all of that stuff up. Yeah. We got a chance to finally see in real time what all of the ramifications of some of this stuff were. Right. And so we sat there with the structural engineer and the contractors and the civil engineer and myself and everybody else. We're all, online at this meeting, and we're going through this. And, we weren't quite in VR to be able to be fully immersed into the model, but, they do a really good job of flying through the whole thing. And they tilt the whole entire building up, and you start to see where the conflicts are, where we've got conduit, from our emergency generator coming in, and it's cutting right through a foundation. And obviously that's not going to work. But what are the decisions that need to be made off of that? Do we lift the duct bank up? Well, no, because we have to have a minimum coverage over this concrete duct bank, so it's got to stay where it's at. Got to lower the foundation. Well, now that has an impact on cost and things like that. So it's just this interesting, marry up of our 2D conversation about this is how we've been building, but this is where we're going. And the future, I think, for us is going to be a lot brighter, because we're going to be able to manage and control a lot of potential change orders or potential RFIs and things like that, because we're going to be able to see it all real time as long as we fill that model with as much information as we possibly can.
Well, this is I want to really stress and encourage people to jump into this now, because you can bet your life that contractors are doing this. They are
absolutely
experts at BIM. They are experts in VR, and you're going to get left behind. And I especially am talking to the ones who have chosen to stay in CAD for as long as possible, because it is a big investment to go into 3D. But if you're still in CAD, there is no VR for CAD, right? It's strictly a 2D world.
No.
And I think that's a huge disadvantage. So if you've waited to get into 3D, now you're way behind when it comes to VR. And I just will say, to reinforce the thing that Cormac's talking about right now, which is the contractor modeled up the civil engineer stuff. You bet they did. You bet they wanted that ad service to do that.
Damn right.
And therefore the whole team benefits from it. The contractor financially, right? But they also understand the project better. They are the ones showing the client the value. And this has huge ramifications for architects. And so if you're really still being reluctant on getting into this stuff, those companies are going to just take that business away, and they are going to be more valuable to the client. So I really encourage everybody to jump into that, because one of the other topics that we wanted to talk about was just being overwhelmed at the office and how it adversely affects performance. And so when you're thinking about the things that we're talking about as being additive, that doesn't get any easier, right? We're talking about doing more, constantly doing more. And I think just something to keep in mind is we can fight against doing more. We can, or we can just let somebody else do it for us. And my hope is that we can do more, but we can do it better, faster, more efficient, without doing more work. But we can work smarter.
Well, let me kind of close this topic out real quick with just kind of this little anecdote that we did yesterday in the office. So we opened up a little betting pool for the people who are working on this project that's now under construction, and we all kicked in $10 and we wrote a number on a piece of paper and tacked it to the wall. Each of us wrote a number, and that number was, how many RFIs will we have on this project when we're all said and done? And what was interesting about that, and what ties into this particular conversation, is honestly, once we get into this point of this fully embracing 3D modeling of all trades, and then we get into, VR, that number should hopefully, and this is coming from the
I'm going to tell you
project
right
manager
now,
with
no way.
I'm just saying that, project manager with two fingers tightly, crossed kind of, perspective here, that should come down, because if you're doing, if the design team is doing what the contractor is already doing, and that's running a virtual clash detection to be able to see all of those functions throughout the building and how they actually engage. Now, yeah, you're going to have site constraints and things like that, I've got, higher water table than we thought, because we only test pitted over here instead of right there, I hit a, really high bedrock or boulders or whatever, you're going to have those, sure. But when it comes to what you really can control, which is your building and the overall building design and all of the services that go into that building, you kind of hope that number comes down low.
You've seen the graph, right, of the investment into BIM, as far as not money investment, but time investment, where it used to be when we were drawing in paper and CAD, it's a bell curve, right? And the bell curve is in DD,
right.
Like the high part of the bell is in DD,
Right,
and now it's in
right,
SD,
yeah.
because BIM forces
Yeah.
you to make a bunch of decisions earlier. This
Right.
is actually what's going to happen, because now they're just pre-construction RFIs. They're not actually during the construction process. They've just moved more forward in the timeline.
And if you're going to, and see, that's,
You're going to get more. You're actually going to get more because the contractor wants to see everything in the model now. And so all of the things that you didn't have time to do because you never had time to do them, just like before, now they actually expect all that stuff in the model, not to be figured out later. So you get all those questions earlier in the process.
Well, I made that comment, a very similar comment to a coworker who we're both, on, kind of project leads, project architects on this new project for Johns Hopkins, and it is this very complex, really big project, and it's going to take quite a long time to do. And it's an existing building that we're basically stripping clean and then adding on to it, but it is structurally connected to all of these other different buildings. And there's a lot of complexity to this that is almost beyond a lot of the things that we've done in this office. So, in other projects that we've done on this medical campus are very similar to this, that they're just adding on or replacing existing elements, but within the existing context. And so there's a lot to do with this. But I was explaining, that one of the things that, we need to start thinking about in revamping is the time commitments as it is, time commitments as it relates to BIM, but as it relates to billing. Because right now we gear all of our contracts to be, basically light loaded here, light loaded there, and then heavy loaded in CDs, and then light loaded in CA. And, we're not doing ourselves any favors by continuing to do the 2D method of billing, because we really do need to have the contractor and the owner understand that we now don't need to worry as much on like the construction document phase. If we are spending more time in the concept, the schematic design and then design development phase, construction documents really should only be, a little bit of arranging stuff on sheets or, doing some things, hoping to get to the point where we don't ever have to generate a set of CDs. We're only going to be generating a set of, unless it's something that's needed for permitting, because they'll probably never get on the BIM, aspect of things. But, we really need to start loading it up front a lot better than we do, because, like we talked about, we went way over on DDs and we went way over on, SDs, and, we haven't really billed to, CDs as much as we, build over the other ones. And yeah, it kind of like flushed out where, we build properly towards all of those things and, it's profitable. But if we noticed just on the last project that we spent more time in the pre-modeling phase of things before we ever got to construction documents. And so we need to start thinking about that, and we need to start pushing our contracts and our clients to understand that we need to do a lot more information gathering and information coordination before we ever get to construction documents. And in this long stretch of construction document phase really needs to be truncated so that we can spend more time in that development. So we can do what the contractor does, and actually getting the contractor on board early in like CM delivery processes helps us out, because I'm okay with, having a contractor kind of like looking over our shoulder for constructability issues and things like that early on, because we sort of want that so that once we actually hit the ground running for construction, that,
I'm making changes here.
that we're not making the changes that, we're only making changes that are basically environmentally controlled, rather than, like site-specific control, rather than, oh shit, we forgot this to detail that one out, and so now we're detailing it out because we really only had time to kind of like do design intent type documents rather than informationally detailed oriented type stuff. And so this conversation can continue on forever, because there's just so many possibilities that we as in the architecture field are only scratching the surface of. That you're absolutely right, that the contractor's already there, and they're wondering what the hell we're
not
doing,
every contractor, but the big ones.
No,
the big ones for sure.
The big ones,
oh man, they're just eating this stuff up. I mean, that's where there is so much expertise coming from that side of the profession, the industry.
Yeah, and honestly, that is another path for architecture students to follow, is going into construction management to be BIM people.
Yep. All right, so I just have a couple things to end us off here, because I know we're long on time. So, are you guys on the Laurel side or the Yanny side?
So honestly, I didn't know what the hell people were talking. I didn't know what the hell the people were talking about. and I saw an article, and the article interviewed the person, like the actual voice, the computer generated voice, and all that other stuff that was put together. So after I read the article, then I clicked the link, and I could only hear Laurel, because that's what it actually is saying.
It's because you're old.
It is not saying Yanny. No, it's because my mind was already swayed to, I don't know what.
Yeah, I think knowing ahead of time. So here's what's interesting about this. Maybe this is a future topic. Is it's perception, right? There's so many ways in which things can modify our perception. It could be, in this particular instance, it could be the speakers you're listening to. If they're very tiny speakers, you might hear one thing versus another. It could depend on the age of your ears. It could depend on the frequencies that you're filtering out. It could be the room that you're in. There's so many different things that could affect this. Totally applies to what we do. Totally applies to architecture.
Now I know why Neil was groaning about that. You said age of the ears.
Shut up.
When I first heard it, I totally heard Yanny every time. And it was funny because the guy who showed me, Chris, he's like, nope, it's Laurel. No, how can you possibly hear Yanny? And then I showed it to my family the other day. And over the time I listened to it, it totally changed. And I wondered how much of it played into what you were just talking about, Cormac, is because, but now when I hear it, at least the latest time I heard it, all I hear is Laurel.
Well, it's funny, as my wife would just like, she goes, I don't know what's more interesting about this, like absolutely trivial debate,
right.
But she goes,
kind of fun.
No, she was like, I don't understand that. People are so entrenched one way or the other.
Oh, it's totally changed for me. Yeah, I'm open.
That they're well. See, but you've opened and you've changed. But most people they hear it and they like,
latch on to one.
It's Yanny, and so they latch on and they're like, I don't understand why you could hear Laurel. It is not Laurel. What the hell is wrong with you?
Did you do it, Neil?
I had no idea what this all was about. I did happen to come across the audio clip. I hear Laurel, and it kind of ended at that. What I find most interesting is how people are using this to create lots of other funny stuff. And that's been the most entertaining thing about this. But I don't know. I heard Laurel and ended at that and moved on.
Well, thing,
this is what is this?
Go ahead.
I was going to say this is the 2018 version of that, bluegrass black dress thing,
and that similar thing. Nobody's looking at the same screen for the most part there. So also there's so many environmental factors that kind of get in the way of these.
Right.
And I guess that's what's interesting about this to me from an architectural point of view is that people perceive different things. Well, I should say they perceive things
differently
through different lenses. It's their own lens, right? And so when we're talking about how people experience buildings or experience architecture, there's so many environmental factors, and they are not you. And so when we say things in absolute terms, it's like this is how people will experience this. That's total BS, right? That is our thinking of how we might want them to experience it, or in some quote unquote perfect condition or whatever. And I just think it's so interesting to think about it from kind of this point of view where it really points out how differently people perceive things. So
right.
That's a total different topic for a different time. Okay. So last thing, couple shout outs to some other podcasts. They have been very good at talking about us on their podcast, and we have been very bad about
who's talking about
them on our podcast. And we just wanted to give a couple recommendations for a couple great podcasts that are out there. I listen to them all the time. I can't say I listen to them every week, but because they are weekly shows, and I have too many podcasts to listen to, but I am trying to catch up. So Entree Architect podcast with Mark LePage, fantastic podcast. I would definitely recommend the episode with Anthony Laney from Laney LA. I love that episode and love what Laney LA is doing with their firm. So it was a cool interview to listen to. And then the other podcast is Inside the Firm with Lance and Al from Colorado, and they talk all about how they are basically running their firm. So if you ever thought about starting your own firm, that's a fantastic podcast to listen to and hear all of the good things, the bad things, the stuff in the middle about starting your own firm. So I just wanted to give a shout out to both of them and give them a listen in your podcast player. Search for Inside the Firm and Entree Architect podcast.
So real quick, here's a little, I guess it's a different perspective. I heard it differently, but I say Colorado. You just said Colorado.
Yes, that's true.
Let's not go there.
Whatever,
Tomato.
San Fran.
All right,
Tomato.
I'm going to cut you off. That's it. We're done. We're done.
Calling it.
This episode is brought to you by Arcat. The music is by System Kid. Subscribe to Archispeak on Apple Podcasts or listen directly from the site. We're happy to report that whatever I did last time for episode 140 did not happen on 141, and you can download the episode on Apple Podcasts.
All right.
Yay. I still don't know what happened for that one. Sorry, everyone. But you can listen directly from the website, and that will work on a phone if you need to do it that way. You have maybe a little less control, but it will
you
work.
need to. You need to listen to it.
Absolutely. Go listen to that episode.
That was a fantastic episode.
Absolutely. It was. Yeah.
Wait, what did we talk about?
Never mind. You can follow the show on social media via Twitter or Facebook, or email us. Actually, don't email us. We get too many emails. And then links to all of these can be found at archispeakpodcast.com. Stay subscribed, everyone, and thanks for listening.
See you in 2 weeks.
And Mazel Tov to the royal couple.
Oh, God. You had to bring that up again. That's it. And... Blowing
'cause you tell me every little thing's gonna be okay. I'm caught in a phone booth on the beach. You reach for your gun to watch or run when someone call 911. Please. You were everything I wanted and more. Oh, when everything was magic. Oh, when everything was magic. Oh, when everything was magic. But more was overboard.